everyone's favorite. Everyone always wants to talk about the IVs. What score do you need to hit to apply to IVs?
So I thought, I looked this up because I thought this might be one of your questions, and students are always asking. Now, as you know, there are over 4,000 universities and colleges in the United States. The Ivies are 8, and they are an athletic league. So there are many, many wonderful, really wonderful universities that are not these 8. Saying that, their test scores are some of the highest. Now, all of these universities, as many of the universities in the United States, have a holistic approach to their application process. Testing is one aspect, and as I've heard admissions directors say, they never accept or reject a student from the test scores. But saying that, the way you'd find out, and every year that changes, the numbers are changing constantly, and you always look at the middle 50% of their scores. And so every year you should go in when you're deciding what your list is, and one of the elements that you should be looking at is that number. How do I compare to students on testing? Because that is an element, and they do studies that demonstrate if schools are still having students do testing, they believe it correlates to student success their first year. Hence, why those scores are important. So the middle 50%, what does that number mean? It means that number that you're going to hear, middle 50%, means the 26% to the 74th percent of the population of students who apply or accepted have that score. So I did an average of all from, so this would have been the numbers that students who were applying for this coming fall reviewed, because they come out in the summer. So the new numbers haven't come out. So the average for the middle 50% for the SAT is 1430. So remember, that's 26% to 1560. So what that means is 25% of the students who do have scores less than 1430, and 25% of the students have scores higher than 1560. What you should be thinking about, whoa, I have a 1420, I can get in. Now, first of all, they look at a lot of different things. And if you're looking at it, everyone is so different, understanding where you're coming from, and perhaps you want to be closer to the middle, of that 50% to think about, and everyone is different. But it puts you in the game. It means your numbers are in line. That's not to say if it's your dream school and you don't quite hit those numbers, it's not realistic. You wouldn't want to have a lot of schools that would fit that, but that's for the SAT. Now for the ACT, it's 32 to 35. So those are pretty competitive numbers, but do know, so I also looked at schools in the New York and Boston area that might be outliers, right? That might not do that, just to give some perspective. So Fordham, New York school, their middle 50% is 1250 to 1430. So very different than the Ivies,
wow.
Right? Big difference.
Very different, yes.
And 28 to 32. So schools, and Fordham is a wonderful school, and it's in New York City. So it's not Columbia scores, but it's in a very close area. You have wonderful opportunities in Fordham. George Washington University, a great university, as you know, in Washington, D.C. Their numbers are 1280 to 1460. Again, very different.
Big difference.
And 29 to 32. And if you look at those schools, you also see those schools are highly competitive. I mean, GW, NYU is 1330 to 1530. So what you hear there is a bit of a bigger range, a little lower, but bigger range. And same with, it's 30 to 34. And then Northeastern, which has become very competitive these days, less than 18% acceptance, and they have a 1360 to a 1540. So their range too is a little longer, and there's 32 to 34. So there's so many schools out there, and so many schools that are test optional, but those very highly, highly competitive schools in the Ivy range, your numbers have to be high.
And when we're talking about like a 35 to an Ivy, are we talking about the super score 35, or it doesn't matter?
Yes, that's what they use. So what they're, again, remember what I said, it's to their advantage, the colleges, to use super score, because what are we talking about right now? They're super scores.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
So it's advantage to everybody.
Oh yeah. And just to demystify to everyone, what is that 50th percentile is? Because I found it very transformative. When I go to some of my students, they're like, what? I can just look it up. So can you just name a school and I will look for the 50th percentile?
Right. And so the 50th, let's name, since we said, say Northeastern. Not all schools are you're going to have as easy a time finding that number, by the way, on their website, to be totally fair. When I work with my students, I use a platform called Guided Path. And on Guided Path, it states all of that information very clearly in a summary page for my students. And if the students have Naviance or Maya Learning or some of their college planning platforms that are similar to my platform, that
Mhm.
information would be easily accessible there. So if you look
So-
at Northeastern University, and usually it would be in fast facts. So you can look at right there, Grace.
Oh, so I'm looking
Acceptance
at
rate and SAT scores. That's right. That top one would be good too.
a lot of other websites are offering information. I think it's usually similar. Academic.
That's it right there. Academic profile.
13, yeah,
You see
40,
it?
70, 50, 50. Insane.
Right. So what did I say? So this is for the fall of 2019. So my numbers would have been for the students of fall of 2018. So in that year difference, the numbers I had, so the difference in the SAT is 1470 to 1550. And it went up from a 33 to a 35 versus a 32 to a 34. So that was a change in 1 year.
That's huge to bump
Northeastern,
it up.
Northeastern had a huge change last year, and now every year is different. So that's other things students should know. When you're looking at data, you're looking at data that's historical, that doesn't reflect when an admissions committee looks at your file, they're looking at you and compared to the applicants that exist at that moment in time in that class. So you're being compared to that class, not to the history of every applicant ever. So you don't know what that group of students look like. You don't know what that profile is. The historical data that you use to help create a balanced list and to give you some sense of admissibility is just a guide. It's not like in the UK where there are some, it's pretty specific. If you're applying to some European schools where they'll say, if you get X in a certain test, you will, usually be accepted. The US schools are much more holistic, and that's not always the case in the UK. Sometimes it's also a guideline for the most competitive ones, but pretty much it's much more of a numbers game. Now throw into that the COVID, where people aren't taking tests, and there's going to be a lot less tests taking, and maybe that means lower test scores. More and more
Or
schools are going.
maybe, judging by my chickens, they're like working with me twice a week now, although the test isn't at the end of August. Like, I don't understand what kind of scores we're going to have. We're going to have like 1600s. We're going to have 1600s.
So they could be even higher, absolutely, because everyone has more time to prepare.
Right.
Very good
There's
point.
so much room and to reflect and to become better readers. Like, what kind of reading can you assign to me? I give them specific journals that replicate the SAT reading material. Like, I think the scores, like, especially for my chickens, they're going to be
There you go. So that's so no one knows, but always remember it's just one point. But you do want to
Sure.
sort of, as I say, you just want to be in the game. Are you in the game, right?
Yeah. And to be in the game, you kind of need to hit, just to repeat what you said, you kind of need to hit about 32 and up on the AC.
For the most competitive, the very highly competitive
So
schools.
32 to 36, obviously they're not going to turn down the 36. And then somewhere around 1430 or higher for the
Yeah,
SAT.
and then if you're talking IVs and some others, and again, it all depends on what else you're bringing to the table and what else is being said and what the school is looking for at that moment in time. But IVs, you certainly always want to be over 1400s. I think it's over 1500s now. I think you want to be closer to 34. And but it all depends.
Yeah,
and It all
definitely.
depends. But it takes some preparation. Because as
And
you
we were
know,
talking
at those
about
scores, you can't. I mean, how many answers can you get wrong? Like it's one or two, right?
4. To get to from a 36 to a 34, you can make like 4 mistakes, and they rob you of points.
But admissions
immediately.
counselors can, and you hear it when you visit, you hear it when you're doing your information sessions, whether that's online now or visiting. It is holistic. They look at everything. This is one element of it, but it's important to understand when you're creating your list to know what the numbers are, so you create a balanced list, because there's a lot of wonderful schools out there.